Welcome to Sharing the Origins of the Educational Opportunity Program. This is a 4-part webinar series that tells a story from the local civil rights movement that had a nationwide impact. I am Julie Bartolotto. I'm the Executive Director of the Historical Society of Long Beach, and I'm a proud double alum of CSULB. The Historical Society of Long Beach collects, preserves, and presents local history. Through historical collections, exhibitions, and programs, we connect people to the past and to the place they live. We strive to present an inclusive community narrative and help create a greater understanding of our neighborhoods, the cities, and its place in the larger world. I'd like to acknowledge our partners in this endeavor, the Black Student Union Elders Association. Without you, your research, knowledge, and important work, we would not be here sharing this story today. We've been meeting for nearly 2 years, envisioning ways to build on the research that you've done and bring the story of EOP to the community. Over that time, we have acquired funding for the project from an American Rescue Grant with the Institute for Museum and Library Services, the Arts Council for Long Beach, the City of Long Beach, and sponsorship from the Port of Long Beach. I specifically would like to appreciate Lawrence Fortenberry, Dr. Willie Elston, and Cecily Harris Walters for developing this series. And I'd like to thank our behind the scenes team, Bianca Moreno, Jesse Lopez, and Jen Malone for making the webinar series work. As is often said, as California goes, so goes the nation. And that is true with the Educational Opportunity Program. EOP had and continues to have a significant impact, opening up higher education, developing generations of leaders from communities who had been underrepresented or not represented in higher ed, and ultimately changing the power dynamics in California and the United States. The series focuses on the Educational Opportunity Program and the legacy of Dr. Joseph L. White. EOP's history starts with community members working to ready young people for college, recruiting minority students, and helping retain them as students at CSULB in the 1960s. I look forward to hearing about the history of this visionary program from our panelists tonight and at the other 3 webinars, and I encourage you all to join us for all of the webinars. We have webinars on June 2nd, June 23rd, and the final one on July 14th. In February of 2023, we're happy to host the BSU Elders Association's collection that documents the origins of EOP in the Historical Society's gallery on Atlantic Avenue. Just a reminder for our audience, if you have questions, please put them in the Q&A. This evening's discussion is entitled The Game Changer, and our panel will share what the Educational Opportunity Program is, the founders, and why they founded the program. Our moderator today is Dr. Gayle Ball-Parker. She holds a BA degree from CSU Dominguez Hills, an MS degree from CSU Long Beach, and a doctorate in technology with an emphasis in education from Pepperdine University. She's held numerous positions in higher education administration, including as the former director of the Educational Opportunity Program at CSUDH, and she currently is the director of the Presidential Scholars Program at CSUDH. She is a member of the Grant African Methodist Episcopal Church in Long Beach. She serves on the board of directors for De Novo Community Health Clinic and the school's federal credit union. Dr. Ball-Parker is a committed proponent of higher education, access, and equity, and is married to longtime community activist Errol Parker. I'm proud to turn the presentation over to Dr. Ball-Parker.
Thank you very much, Julie. And again, I want to welcome everyone to this exciting evening. I knew about EOP, just like Willie and Brett. I was an EOP student. I think most of the folks we knew were EOP students. So it's really going to be interesting for me to find out additional information, as well as those of you that are on this webinar. And I hope and I know that you're going to enjoy this evening. Civil rights activist Ella Baker once said, "Give people light and they will find a way." Were she alive today, Ella Baker would applaud enthusiastically the light that is the EOP, or Educational Opportunity Program, and thousands upon thousands of students who have found a way to success thanks to EOP. So again, good evening and welcome to the first in a series of 4 webinars on the origin of EOP at Cal State Long Beach, brought to you by the Black Student Union Elders Association. The BSUEA is comprised primarily of retired CSULB African-American alumni, mentees, and colleagues of Dr. Joseph L. White and former BSU members. This webinar series was inspired by the BSUEA collection, Legacy, Celebration, and Remembrance, a stunning visual display of Black, Indigenous, people of color students and faculty and student activism during the mid-60s into the early 70s. Today, we will introduce you to the godfather of EOP, the late Dr. Joseph L. White. To help us learn more about the man and his mission, we will talk to 2 individuals who knew Dr. White well and ask them to share their personal memories of the lasting impact the remarkable educator and mentor had on them. So let me introduce you to our first guest. They are not strangers to any of you, I'm sure, but we're going to give you all their credentials. The first is Dr. Willie Elston, who earned a doctorate and master's degree in higher education and organizational change from the Department of Policy Studies at UCLA. However, he started his higher education journey at CSU Long Beach, where he earned a baccalaureate degree in business administration. He has over 25 years of experience in higher education, as well as a grant writer, administrator, lecturer, and consultant with community-based organizations. He also worked for 13 years at CSU Long Beach as director of several Upward Bound programs. Moreover, he comes from the community. He was a member of the 1968 second cohort. Okay, Willie, we're telling your age. Second cohort of CSULB EOP students from Centennial High School in Compton. I'm going to talk to you later. I'm a tar babe. And he worked as an EOP recruiter and a campus and community activist. Next, we have Brett Waterfield, who gives us a different perspective of Dr. White, as he is the nephew of Dr. White. Brett was born and raised in San Francisco and attended Cal State University Long Beach as an EOP student. He earned a BS in criminal justice and a master's of public administration. He has 25 years experience working in higher ed. He served CSU Long Beach as director of the Office of Student Life and Development and was a founding director for the Men's Success Initiative, where he developed a strategic plan and innovative strategies to increase the retention and graduation for African American and Latino men at CSULB. Currently, Brett serves as the director of the Office of Educational Partnerships, OEP, at CSU Dominguez Hills. He manages over $29 million in U.S. Department of Education and private philanthropic foundation grants that support the work of OEP. He has served Long Beach as a Parks and Recreation Commissioner and as a member of Alpha Phi Alpha fraternity, thank you, one of the Divine Nine. Brett is also the father of 3 college graduates. So those are the folks that we're going to be speaking with this evening. But first, let's talk about EOP. What is EOP? For more than 50 years, the Education Opportunity Program has offered assistance through admissions, mentorship, academic programs, financial aid, counseling, and other services to first-generation, historically low-income college students who were also environmentally disadvantaged, but displayed the potential to succeed in higher education. And I believe programs like Summer Bridge, and Willie and Brett can let me know if this is correct, programs like Summer Bridge were originally initiated in the EOP programs because we were trying to introduce students to the college environment, which they had not known about before. So now that I've introduced you to my fine colleagues and told you what EOP is and what it's about, let's talk about Dr. Joseph L. White. Dr. White was born December 19th, 1932 in Lincoln, Nebraska. He rose to national attention in 1970 with the publication of Toward a Black Psychology, which was published by Ebony Magazine. There's a significance of this being published in Ebony Magazine. As the story goes, Dr. White did not want it published in an academic referee journal because he wanted this article to be read by folks of color in barbershops and beauty shops across the country. And if your house was anything like mine, everyone had Ebony and Jet magazines on their coffee table in the living room, right? So let's further discuss Dr. White. His education began at San Francisco State College, where he earned undergraduate and postgraduate degrees in psychology. He earned a PhD from Michigan State in clinical psych in 1961. He joined the Department of Psychology at Long Beach State in 1962. Dr. White was known as the father of Black psychology and was the founder of the Association of Black Psychologists, also known as ABPSI. And this great organization continues today. Now, how did EOP come to be? Well, let's hear from the man himself. Until we get that clip going, why don't we have a talk with Dr. Elston and Brett? And why don't we start with Dr. Elston? And why don't you describe, your relationship with Dr. White?
I was a member of the EOP second cohort who arrived at Cal State Long Beach in 1968. However, the first cohort of EOP students that enrolled in 67 and 68 were integral contributors in the development of EOP, student organizations such as METCHA, BSU, Black Studies, Chicano Studies, Asian Studies, Native American Studies, etc. Black students such as Victor Brown, Laura Murphy, Dwight Herbert, Tony Wilkins, Valerie Moreland, Ed Averett, Chunky Marsh, and many others were the ones who started the BSU. In the beginning, they fought for facilities for students to receive tutoring, obtain course advisement, and to socialize other than the Nugget and at being at the Seroptimus house. Personal memories. Dr. White, I had a very unique relationship with him. I met him in April of 1968. I was attending a presentation at Centennial High School in Compton during the same week in which Martin Luther King was assassinated, which was April 4th, 68. We had a personal conversation after his presentation, and he inquired about my future goals in college. I shared with him that my parents were separated, and I was the oldest of 4 children and had no concrete plans and desire to continue playing football. Dr. White said the following, I think this might be an opportunity for you because I have a new program called the Educational Opportunity Program. He provided me with a CSULB EOP application and told me to return it directly to him. He explained that financial aid might not be available during my first semester, but recommended that I attend EOP enrollment orientation at Cal State Long Beach in May or June of 1968. I took him up on his offer, and I had to commute to CSULB for the first semester.
All right, thanks, Willie. All right, Brett, why don't you talk to us about your relationship with Dr. White? We know it was a little different from Willie's experience, but I'm sure nonetheless impactful. So why don't you talk to us about your relationship with him?
Thanks, Dr. Gayle. I appreciate that. As you said, my relationship was different. For me, it was Uncle Joe, and he was always Uncle Joe, probably up until I was about the third year of my kind of professional career working at Cal State Long Beach. When Kathy Robigo, who was an EOP instructor, brought me some literature that showed kind of the history of EOP. It was an article from the Long Beach State Daily 49er, and showing that my uncle had started this program. So right away I called him up. I'm like, Uncle Joe, what's going on here? And then he began then to tell the history of his efforts in starting this program. I think that's a significant story to tell, because for Uncle Joe, Dr. White, it was really never about him. It was always about others and the work that he could do for others there. You know, I even recall when I was applying to college, in high school senior, my Uncle Joe calls me, he says, Brother Brett, that's what he used to call me. You apply for this, when you apply for college, there's going to be this box on there, educational opportunity program. I want you to check that box and the people will take care of you. And that was the extent that he ever told me about that story about his starting the program until I asked him years later there. So, but I do know that, you know, his life's work, being around him was always about empowering students of color to really see themselves as college students, college graduates. And then also the other key part about that, which really reflective of his work, is that instilling in us a sense of responsibility once you've got that degree, to keep that movement going, to keep that effort going, to reach back and really help the next generation. So it's really ironic that the work that I do now, that's what it's all about. It's really about keeping those pipelines open, and that vision that Uncle Joe started over 50 years ago there. So while my relationship was different, it's interesting that my career work is along those same lines there. So there's these subtle influences that once I reflect on, understand that he was really a role model in the work that he did, and not necessarily from a kind of self-glamorization piece, but really a community building. And that's a lot of what EOP was about. I'm sure we'll get into some of the dynamics and the benefits of EOP there, but it was really, he was about building community and access and in supporting folks. And you know, kind of like the story Willie told, he always believed in students. You can do anything. I don't recall him ever telling folks, well, you know, that's not a possibility. But to see that light, particularly in the times of when he was coming up, you know, moving to Long Beach as one of the first African-American faculty there, and having to get one of his white colleagues to go to the realtor to rent a house. So my aunt, my cousins would have a place to live there, you know. So while he was having his own personal challenges professionally, he was creating this pathway, you know, for students, for EOP students, for generations to come there. So while my story is different, you know, it really exemplifies him as a person and not just as a professional, that this was his life's work.
And as both of you talked about, he was really about support. It wasn't about admitting the student and leaving them alone, right? I think his whole concept of EOP was about wraparound services before it was called wraparound services, because he not only wanted you to get admitted, he wanted you to continue on through graduation. All right, well, let's go ahead to another question. Dr. Elston, why don't you discuss with us Dr. White's relationships with other faculty and staff and community members in Long Beach and on that campus, and how they all work together to go about bringing EOP to fruition?
Well, you know, one of the things, and Brett mentioned that earlier, is that Dr. White was really into leadership development of students. In addition to, he had this unique ability to be able to establish relationships amongst faculty. And he knew he was in the forefront of trying to provide access, particularly for people of color. One of the other things that he also talked about and received a lot of assistance from those that were before me. Some of the people that came they were high school athletes, they were cheerleaders, they wanted to be involved in fraternities or sororities. And they were folks looking to see, once we got to Cal State Long Beach, where we belonged on a predominantly white campus with an enrollment of nearly 30,000 students. These students worked alongside Dr. White and his colleagues in the development of EOP, BSU, Black Studies, Ethnic Studies, whose primary focus was to address diversity and inclusion and equity at CSULB.
Right.
And then the person that, and as Brett was mentioning, Dr. White was one of those individuals that would go out into the community and recruit students. He was going from Compton to Long Beach to East LA and Wilmington, trying to find students that need opportunities to attend higher ed. The other unique thing about Dr. White was he was a psychologist, and he established a practice in Long Beach and was active with Long Beach civil rights organizers, which was really interesting, which kind of led to us discovering a number of things that he was involved in and the relationship he had with them.
Right. All right. I'm
okay.
sorry. Go ahead, Willie. Go ahead.
Okay. The other thing I was just going to mention, because, you know, sometimes, you know, we talk about ourselves, but we want to make sure that those others that were involved in these activities that came before us. And the group that came before us kind of mentored us, shepherded us, and they did a great job. And a lot of them were coming from the neighborhood schools as well, or the local schools, Long Beach Poly, Centennial High School, Compton High School, anywhere where he could find people that might have an interest that he didn't think had access.
Great. All right. So next, let's talk about Dr. White's advocacy for EOP through recruitment and special admissions, including that 2% rule. Maybe people don't know about that, but Willie, you want to talk about that first, and then Brett, maybe you want to add, because I remember that 2% rule when I was director of EOP at Dominguez. So Willie, why don't you start off that conversation with us?
Okay. Or Brett, jump in anytime you feel like it now.
Yeah, go ahead.
Now, one of the things he was always concerned about was this 2% rule that that primarily applied to athletes. And he took it upon himself to say, if you're going to provide 2%, you need to do the same thing for other students of color or other low-income students that are interested in coming to higher ed.
Right.
And that seemed to be the basis of that.
Okay. I remember when I was director of EOP, I don't remember it being 2%, but it was a percentage. So we were allowed to have special admissions, EOP slots, as we used to call them, for students, but it was a certain percentage of the first-time freshman class that was admitted.
Right.
Right. Okay. Brett, you were going to say something
Yeah,
about
Dr.
that?
Gayle, if I could add, I think, you know, Willie is giving the nice version of the word. You know,
All right, why don't you give us the not nice version?
you know,
Keep it real here.
as Dr. White said, you know, there was a little bit of demanding going on, and him going to the administration there, you know, and if we know those times, you know, there was a lot of demanding going on in our communities there, you know, but it was a fight to get those spots that we talk about there. And not only to get them, but then to fill them, you know, and as Willie said, you know, Michael Joe was up and down the 710 freeway if the 710 was there, but that corridor actively looking for people to take these spots there, because he didn't want the university to turn around and say, you know, I told you so. There's really no interest amongst the community to come to our university there. You know, so as you meet folks that were in those first cohorts, you know, they tell you that they were literally kind of hanging out in the neighborhood when this guy pulls up in a university van saying, what are you doing? You know, what are you going to do next there? So literally pulling people off the streets, putting that paper in their hand, like Willie said, and bringing them back to the university there. So I think it's really critical to say that this was a really an aggressive approach given the times and things that were going on. The other thing I don't want to be dismissed about is, you know, the community that Willie talked about in terms of the first generation or the first cohort supporting the second cohort. That's what EOP continues to be to this day. Dr. Gayle, Willie, I know you had peer advisors, you know, when you were EOP director, you know, it's that same model there that we have to build community around these folks that we bring in there. And I remember as an EOP student, you know, in their early 80s, not only was it community on campus, you know, but we were having potlucks at our EOP advisors' homes on the weekend.
Right, yes.
You know, for those of us who were trying to find where that next meal was as college students. So it was this real different concept of what higher education looked like, you know, that he ushered in, and that a lot of folks take for granted now in terms of the services, the community that, now today's student development theorists say about, building community and challenge and support and so forth there, Dr. White was doing these kind of things, through his training, but mainly through his passion there and knowing what he needed when he moved from the Midwest all the way out to San Francisco to go to San Francisco State and not knowing about it. He needed that community, and that's what helped him be successful as an undergraduate and as the first African-American PhD student in Michigan State, PhD in clinical psychology, always looking for that community and understanding the significance of that community. And I think that's really an important principle of EOP that we'd be remiss if we didn't emphasize there.
And that whole concept about community was important. That's what kept us there, because we didn't know a lot of other people. We had intrusive or intensive advising before they called it that.
Mm-hmm.
So much so that when students finished their first couple of years and it was time for them to go to their department, they didn't want to leave.
Mm-hmm.
But we couldn't do advising in the majors, but we really had to usher them out. But they really felt a little isolated after they left EOP. So that's why we still maintained a relationship with them through to graduation. Okay. All right. Let's talk about the Harmer Bill. That's key to EOP and how all that happened, and the 1969 Harmer Bill and its impact on colleges and universities in California. Dr. Elston, you want to talk about that? Because that was legislation. Right.
Yes.
That was a little beyond boots on the ground and the community work. So you want to talk about that for us, please?
Yes, and it's kind of interesting. As most of us probably know, the Harmer Bill, EOP started in '68, but the Harmer Bill got legislated in '69. The unique relationship that Joe had with Willie Brown was really unique.
Mm-hmm.
Willie Brown was an upcoming political individual, and Joe at the same time was an upcoming academician, and they both were community-based. One of the things, and this is, as I understand it, is that the governor at that time was Ronald Reagan. They were trying to see about getting EOP legislated and passed and institutionalized. But they didn't think they were going to be able to get it done utilizing a Democrat in trying to do it. I think Jesse Unruh was the person that was there. And so they struck a deal. Now, if you ask them about it, you didn't get it from me. But anyway, they ended up striking a deal and getting the Harmer Bill legislated, and it was also to be named after him. He was from Glendale, and that was how they were going to be able to get it to the governor and to get it signed.
So they were working across the aisles there, right?
Yes, they were. Yes, they were.
Yeah, I think, we know that Willie Brown has had a long history of politics in California. Love him or hate him, he was the face of politics in California for a long time. So you're right. What I think was really strategic, and I never really had that conversation about how they got to where they got there. But once again, the political strategist that Willie Brown was, still is. Mm-hmm. My guess is really influential in how they approached Harmer and the significance of that to be able to get enough votes to get that bill passed that then institutionalized this EOP movement there. And I think that was really critical there, not institutional, but putting a line item in the state budget there that allowed the program to blossom across the state, and now on all 23 campuses, a line item that was the root of that bill there. So, that strategy and that relationship that they had was really significant in getting that done.
Right. Yeah. Brett, you look mighty young on that picture, sir. How long ago was that?
That was actually at the 50-year celebration that Willie and the elders put together there. And interesting story, that was the I believe the day before, where the San Francisco mayor had died in the grocery store on the spot. You know, so Willie Brown literally flew down from San Francisco, did his piece with the driver waiting outside the pyramid, did his piece, got back in the car, back to Long Beach Airport, and flew back to the city there because he was very close to the mayor, and he had literally passed away that morning. But once again, I think that's really significant in understanding the significance of their relationship, you know, and the significance of this program here. You know, so that was kind of a behind the scenes thing that I don't think a lot of people realize was going on that particular day of that celebration there.
Wow, that's real interesting. That talks about commitment and how Willie Brown felt about EOP as well as Dr. White.
Yes.
So, you know, you started talking a little bit, Brett, about Dr. White's relationship with Willie Brown. Willie, did you want to add to that and talk about maybe how he got him involved and how they both became involved in the development of EOP and then went to Harvard with this bill, this proposition?
Well, you know, Dr. White was a smooth operator. That's a good way to, you know, because one of the things that he did was Dr. Demos, him and Dr. Demos were very good friends, and he was a psychologist. And as you mentioned earlier, Dr. White was the first Black psychologist in that department. So they were trying to see, well, what ended up happening was Demos had a good relationship and ended up becoming the dean of students, which is like the vice president of student services now. And he helped Dr. White in trying to be able to see about bringing in more students of color. And it was really significant, you know. And so, and I, you know, once you look at what they did, you begin to think that they were really involved in succession planning, because Dr. White left Long Beach in 1968, the summer of 1968, and he went back to the Bay Area. Well, the person that ended up taking over EOP was Ernie Clark.
Wow.
Ernie Clark was from the Long Beach community. He was if I'm not mistaken, he was the president of the Community Improvement League, one of the largest nonprofit organizations in the Black community. He ended up taking that position, and because when when Joe left, they were also, you know, negotiating a relationship about seeing about a Black Studies department. And so he picked up the ball, and in addition to bringing students in, he was also working on the Black student, the Black Studies department. The thing that also happened was he brought in the person who was working with him, Marie Burks, and that was the child care center that he had been overseeing. She became the office manager of EOP. And for most people that have been EOP students, she had a 30-year career in EOP.
Wow.
And she was like the godmother of EOP. So students that needed things, book assistance in getting books, academic advising, anything that they needed, she was the person that they went to see. Wow. And so, as Brett mentioned earlier, you know, he developed a network of people to be able to support. And I think one of the things that's really unique about EOP was, you know, the emphasis was on recruitment, you know, advisement, retention, and graduation, and mentoring. And so you couldn't come out of there without knowing that that was your responsibility, because that's what they gave you.
Right.
So yeah, they were just a great group of people. And the other thing about Joe was, you know, all of these people were kind of the next generation. They were coming out of the civil rights movement. And so now that they were on these academic campuses, they were trying to make sure that there were avenues for other students of color and low-income folks to be able to attend.
Right. Great. All right. Now, let me ask you both a question. Based upon these discussions we've had about EOP, Dr. White's intent, his whole concept of being in the community and then coming to the campus, to the academy, where are we now with programs like EOP? And what would Dr. White say? And then I want to ask you, are we continuing his legacy? Are we continuing the vision that he had for diversity at Long Beach and other institutions of higher education? I know that's a lot of questions, but you know, maybe you guys might want to break it down some, but I'm very curious because I don't think this day and age, we understand what it took to develop an EOP. You know, it could not have been easy.
Yeah, Gayle, that's an interesting point. As I think about, the time spent with my uncle in some of his later years, he wasn't much for reflecting and assessing. He was really about moving and making there, so it's really hard to think, what he was thinking because he was always so engaged in the work and the next generation there. And I don't think he wanted a lot of things to get in the way of that path there. But I do know that, EOP continues, has stood the test of time. We've dealt in California with some political challenges to affirmative action and other things, but that legislative piece of EOP really helped institutions be able to do targeted outreach, even when propositions were passing in the state that were kind of anti-affirmative action, opportunities there. Because that bill was there, I remember when I was at Long Beach State working there, and we could no longer do what they call targeted outreach with state funds there, and Vice President Dr. Doug Robinson at the time, empowered EOP and put an additional dollar line in EOP that created the EOP outreach work there that Kirkland Robertson and others were involved in that beginning. Art Medina is doing that work now there. So EOP was able to be that conduit to making sure that there was consistency in that outreach there. And I don't say that to say that we don't have our challenges today there, but I think that foundation is so strong that it continues to do work there, and it's really interesting because if you look at the parallels between, this movement, the beginning, and our TRIO programs there, and one could argue that a lot of that work grew out of this movement here. So I remember Alan Nishio once saying, who was one of our associate vice presidents for student affairs, that EOP really changed the face of how our nation looks at recruitment and equity and access there. It kind of was a springboard to a lot of the things that we see going on across the nation there. So while we have our struggles and challenges there, we have to look at, in 2020 alone, there was over 35,000 students in the CSU system that were EOP students. If this has been going on for 50 years, there's well over 100,000 students who have gained access through this EOP program here.
That'd be great. What do you have to say about that, Dr. Elston, since you were the second cohort?
Well, and some of this was the research that we did only we stumbled upon it. When Joe started his practice in Long Beach, he became really an activist, and he was in direct communication with folks in all communities in Long Beach. So that was important. And he, some of them, there were some like Evelyn Knight, Edna Mahan. They were people that ended up teaching in the Black Studies department as a result of their relationship with Joe and others on that campus. And one of the things that was real interesting that we discovered was that the community had been conducting tutorial programs in the basement of the churches even before EOP was established.
Wow.
And that was one of the things that they wanted to do. And Joe was real adamant about the importance of being able to keep students in the pipeline. And, and as you just mentioned, Gayle, that's real critical, and
Don't they call that early outreach these days?
that's what it's supposed to be.
Yeah, right.
That's what it's supposed to be.
Yeah.
But
All right. Well,
Yeah,
like I said, I'm sorry, go ahead, Brett.
something, I think, the pipeline piece, if I would say something, would be Dr. White's legacy there. Those that continue to do this work, that he kind of had this movement or phrase that he talked about in terms of the freedom train. And there's, hundreds, probably thousands of college graduates, professionals, lawyers, doctors, and so forth that were on this freedom train here. And that was, his later in life kind of mission and things that he coined there. And I think that's really significant because the work, even though he had moved on from EOP, continued to build there. And I would be really remiss that, not just myself, but throughout our family there, my uncle's two of his daughters are in higher education. Lori, my oldest cousin, Dr. Lori White, is president of DePaul University in Greencastle, Indiana. And I had a conversation with her a couple of weeks ago about, increasing diversity in Greencastle, Indiana. I was like, Lori, I've been to Greencastle, Indiana. Good luck with that there. But it continues to be that mission. My cousin Lisa, Dr. Lisa White, who's, one of the few African-American geoscientists in the country, there's had numerous National Science Foundation grants that were about access and working with the inner city kids to get them interested in the natural sciences there. So this becomes kind of inbred in what people do once they've kind of had this experience or have been exposed to his spirit, and really the empowerment that he gives people and belief in people is really contagious there. And, there's many people that I know that are doing things across the country that will speak to that legacy. So when we talk about, how would he feel now? I think he would be proud, the humble person he is, but still calling on each one of us, to do our part there. So that's why this work that Willie knows are doing with the series is so important there, because hopefully this will inspire others to continue to do this work.
Right, exactly. Well, let's talk for a few minutes and then we're going to wrap it up and we're going to show a video and have a short Q&A. But how would you describe Dr. White's vision about the need for diversity at Long Beach State and other institutions? And do you think it's different now than it was then, especially given our political climate? So I don't know, Willie or Brett, whoever wants to go first.
There's a couple of things. One, I think, he would talk about what the existing climate looks like now. One of the things he was always concerned about, because he, and he wasn't, afraid to confront those about what needed to be done if you really wanted to fight poverty, and that seemed to be a core mission of a lot of people that came out of this civil rights movement. He talked about, after the 1965 Watts riot, why aren't you in those communities? And this was speaking to higher ed, recruiting people from those communities to bring them to this institution. And one of the things that I recall him talking about was, he's on campus one day and looking outside his window, and he could almost count the number of students of color that he saw on one hand. Wow. And so he was very concerned about that. But what he did, not only that, but, and you mentioned earlier, Gayle, was the number of Black psychologists that were trained by him was critical.
Yes.
And a number of them, and Brett will definitely be able to tell you that a number of them ended up being presidents at the universities.
Dr. Thomas Parham at Cal State Dominguez Hills was one of them.
Right, right.
Yes.
So the other thing about Joe was, he never forgot from which he came. And the community was real essential for him. The relationship that we discovered that he had in the Long Beach community was unbelievable. Everybody knew Joe, you know what I mean?
Right.
And not just as a professional and instructor at Cal State Long Beach, but he was a person that was active in the community. And anything he could possibly do to make sure that students had opportunities, that's where he was going to be.
Right. Great. All right. Well, thank you both so very much, but you aren't going anywhere because we have some questions in the chat. But before we do that, let's just kind of take a look at Dr. White, and let's hear from, as I say, the man, the legend, the game changer. And after we see a clip, then we'll come back for a short Q&A. Why don't we go to the chat and let's have a few of the questions and see what we have. Okay. This is from Craig Hendricks. He says, Willie Brown's political genius is apparent in this instance to convince Senator Harmer, one of the most conservative Republicans in California politics, to support an educational program for underserved students in the 1960s. Correct, Craig. That was amazing. Willie or Brett, you guys have any comments to that?
No, I just go ahead,
You
Brett.
agree?
I thought it was
Right.
masterful, personally.
Yes.
Yeah, I just wish I had that conversation with my uncle about, you know, we had a lot of conversations about purpose and strategies, but never that one. I came across a little bit more information about John Hammer lately, you know, and it's just like, wow, that is really fascinating. I really wish we had the opportunity to dig a little deeper on that.
Okay. All right. So we have a comment from Lori. Oh, okay. We have a question from Julie B. She says, tell us about the 2% rule. What was it? Either Dr. Elston or Brett, either one of you guys want to address? Someone is asking about the 2% rule and what was it?
I'm not real familiar with it. I could, you know, kind of try to make some sense of it just behind kind of the history. And Dr. Gayle, you kind of spoke of that, you know, of the number of slots that were provided to EOP places there. So I don't know if that represented, you know, 2% of the incoming class there, but, you know, as you know, Dr. Gayle and Willie, one of the battles of EOP has always been trying to maintain the number of slots that were available. But I do remember distinctively that my uncle tied admissions to what they were doing around athletes there, you know, and that was really his end to doing this. It's like, if you can do this for athletes, you can do it for us regular folk at the same time. Those are literally his words there. So I would guess that it had something to do with the number of slots that were afforded to an EOP program.
Right.
There.
I have a story. Dr. White came over to campus. There was a gentleman at our campus, Dr. Michael Laurent, who had started a men's group years ago. And Dr. White was there, and he told the story that a university, I don't want to call it, I think it was OU, so quote me if I'm wrong, but he said that they invited him to campus to talk about how to recruit Black students. So they took him to a football game, and he looked on the football field and told him, you don't have trouble recruiting Black students. So one of the things about Dr. White, he, as the young people say, he kept it 100. You know. So here's another question. It looks like this is from Julie Bartolato. How can we encourage more people of color from Long Beach to attend CSULB, particularly Black high school graduates and Long Beach City College transfer students?
Dr. Gayle, I'd like to take a stab at that.
All right, go for it.
You know, work I do now, and you mentioned it in our introductions, is, you know, I have 12 federal TRIO and Gear Up grants there. I think, you know, the African proverb, it takes a village to raise a child. I think that we have to be community committed to the preparation process for our young people. there. And I think, you know, a lot of the work that we do in pipeline work is not just with that student, but really empowering and educating and building confidence and belief in the families, you know, that college is possible and doable there. I think is one thing that's really critical. And a lot of the work that we do is, you know, bringing folks back. We're really good at bringing them back to our universities, but are we bringing them back to our high schools and our middle schools to talk about, you know, their journeys? And I was once in your piece in doing that, either long-term or short-term mentoring there. I was on a phone call today with the leadership in Inglewood Unified, you know, and just really talking about appreciating these, you know, TRIO grants that are coming into these schools to offer relief and support and supplement some of the work that's being done. We got some fabulous community-based organizations, you know, Gayle, Dr. Gayle, your sorority's out there doing things there. We have to hold up and acknowledge the folks that are doing this work and make it, even sometimes in education, we get in the way of ourselves, you know, and giving those that are interested agency in helping with this struggle there of getting folks into the pipeline there. But it's got to be a full community effort there. We can't just rely on those in the classrooms and the schools. We have to be there to support the teachers and hold folks accountable at the same time, you know, just like you and I are accountable for our jobs, holding folks accountable, but accountable in the ways that are constructive to building solutions and not just tearing down institutions. But if we're going to challenge institutions, we have to be there to build solutions also there. So I think it's really got to be a community approach and more folks involved and willing to roll up their sleeves and do some of the less glamorous work in being there for our young people in our schools.
Right, exactly.
You know,
Go ahead, Dr. Elston.
my experience working as an Upward Bound director, I did that for 13 years. And you know, we were able to put 97% of our students into post-secondary education. But I think one of the couple of keys that make that model work is one, you need to get them as early as you possibly can. If you can get them in the 9th grade and be able to help them complete their college readiness courses to be ready by the time they were ready to graduate, that is significant. The other thing about Upward Bound was we were able to afford them a 6-week opportunity to live on campus, to be able to see how campus life is, and to be with other kids that were doing the same thing, you know? So they didn't have to worry about this notion of, well, you're nerdy or you're doing this, that, and the other. We tried to make accommodations for those that were athletes, but they still had to come. And these students too, we were talking about, you had to come on Saturdays, or at least some Saturdays out of the month, so that we could give you supplemental instruction to make sure that you would be able to succeed in your classroom. The other thing is, in the curriculum with Upward Bound, we were trying to help them with courses that they were getting ready to take in the fall. You know what I mean? So as opposed to having them behind, and then it frightens me now, because after a year of the pandemic, where these students are going to be, you know? So they're not going to be knocking down your doors. But the other thing too that I think is significant is that you need to be able to have staff that you are able to train, like Joe used to talk about. He was adamant about training staff and having staff that can go into schools and recruit students that look like them, you know? So that may be not just, you know, going monthly or, you know, every once a year, but I mean, you have to do it on a regular basis, and you have to go to those student organizations to be able to talk to those students as well as their parents.
I think another thing I just thought about is, you know, how do we value education, you know, as a community there? And I think some of us who've been at this for a long time, there's so many competing forces for young people now there, and how do we continue to show the value in education? I think, you know, and this could be me, kind of the old guy speaking, but I think, you know, there's so many competing forces and so many kind of short-term wins that our young people see and have access to there. And we know that education is it's a long game. It's the long game. It's not the short game there. So what may be of value now, you know, we know that your earning potential with a college degree over your lifetime is much greater on average or even above average than it is without and where you are now there. So how do we kind of connect those two, you know, education and the value that comes with it also? And I think also, you know, meeting young people where they are and making sure our approaches and pedagogies are really reflective of today's youth. There's some fabulous work being done by Dr. Chris Iman at USC, you know, that talks about, you know, really adapting and understanding our culture of young people and making sure that our educational classrooms reflect their interests and not the interests that we've known before. But, you know, our young people are bright, they're smart, they're tech savvy. So how do we make sure that we are pushing the right buttons to get them excited about these opportunities and not just, you know, putting it in front of them there, but really making folks excited and understand the value and challenging them. You know, I think we talk about degrees, but we don't talk about scholarships sometimes there, and, you know, critical thinking and learning and, you know, figuring out what you want to be and so forth there. So it's really has to be kind of a holistic approach where we're developing the mind, the spirit. And that's what Dr. White, Uncle Joe was about, is like nourishing the spirit of people as much as the degrees there.
Yeah. Okay, we're going to wrap this up soon, but there are a couple other questions I would like your response to before we leave. Was there resistance to the program from the university, and talk about how that was countered?
Was there resistance from bringing in students through EOP? Is that?
Yes, I think that's what the question was. Because it could not have been very popular, right? So how did Dr. White and some of his colleagues manage to deal with that resistance from the institution?
Well, you know, I think particularly people in academia, they have to listen to students. That's essential. There was resistance. But students like at Cal State Long Beach early on, they were demonstrating and they were real active about what was needed for them to be successful. And those, you know, staff that were there were supportive of those students in trying to obtain that, you know. So there was resistance. There is no doubt about it. But but change comes with that kind of resistance, you know. I mean, I don't think that's any different than what we're seeing in the country now. You know?
And I think if you look at what was going on in the country at that time, we were in a country in kind of, I won't say turmoil, but resistance across our nation. You know, we talked about the civil rights going on. There was a protest against Vietnam. So one could argue that this EOP movement, you know, was fueled by a spirit of resistance that was taking place in our country at that time there, you know. And I don't think in talking to my Uncle Joe, he talked about failure or, you know, giving up per se. It was just so adamant and important, particularly with what was going on in the country and what you know, people of color were experiencing at that time, you know. And it being someone who valued, you know, education and had these degrees, that was his resistance, you know, while folks were out resisting for civil rights and, you know, the war in Vietnam and so forth. You know, this was his battleground there in a fight that I would say no matter what resistance was there, he, in the conversations I had with him, he was pretty determined, you know, to push this through. But like Willie said, I'm sure there was resistance.
Okay. All right, just have one last question. And then what we're going to do is there were some questions. They're going to be sending out information, thank you information about the other 3 webinars to folks that are on here today. And we can address maybe some of the questions that people had. So one of the last things, now we're all talking from a certain perspective in our lives. We're adults now, right? We have children of our own, we have grandchildren. But I want to know, as students, Dr. Elston and Brett, as students, how aware were you of the importance of EOP and the lasting changes in power dynamics that would result? Or were you? I know I wasn't. When I came to Cal State Dominguez Hills as an EOP student, I was 17. I had no clue about that. You know, I almost felt like it was supposed to be that way because I came into a program like that.
Mhm.
You know, I think as I got older, mature, and I went on to grad school and started doing some other things, I realized that. But I don't think I knew that in the beginning. What about you, Dr. Elston, and then you, Brett?
Well, I think during my era, we were very fortunate because that cohort in front of us kind of took us under their wing. Just like y'all talked about a little while ago about, having potlucks and those kinds of things. Because people were struggling. We were, work study students,
Right.
And trying to pay rent with that, So the older ones, sometimes those people that had apartments, they were, preparing chili or some kind of meal at their house and inviting students there, And so, and then we didn't have a lot of places in which we could gather. I mean, when we talk about resistance, because when I first got there, to Cal State Long Beach, we didn't have a place to socialize.
Wow.
We would go look for empty classrooms to be able to have our lunch and to be able to work, do our homework, And then particularly when we first got there as freshmen, there's the upper campus and the lower campus.
Right.
Somebody's got to guide you about, hey, you need to, if your classes are at such and such a time, these are the ones that you need to be taking. So I think it needs to be people that have that genuine interest of being able to help students be able to make that transition.
Okay, thank you. What about you, Brett?
Dr. Gayle, I think what you said is kind of what my experience was. As an EOP student, as a freshman, I just thought that's how college was there. It wasn't until later on that I realized that was a special piece of that experience there. The fact that these people, EOP family and counselors and the Marie Burks and Pat Mita and Freddie the Jet Davis, Barry Thomas, and those 4 really just kind of took us in like it was their responsibility to make sure that we didn't fail there. So while it was a little bit irritating sometimes when you're hanging out in the quad and you hear people yelling, "What are you doing? Just go to class." I just thought that was the way of being, the way that we had to take care of each other to get through school. It wasn't till later on till I realized that this was really an intentional piece that came from experiences that those that came before us had, like Willie has spoken to there. I was fortunate enough to go to, Long Beach in the early 80s where it was, EOP was pretty well institutionalized there, and the culture of it was that literally the advisors and peer advisors would walk the quad and kicking people off the quad, making sure they were going to class.
Right.
So it's not till later on that you realize that's really not how college works on a regular basis there. So I'm thankful to those folks that did that there and helped us through. You mentioned it, intrusive advising before it was a higher ed term there. That's what folks were doing. They were in your life. They weren't just, they weren't just, advising your classes. They were in your life and making sure that you were going to class. If you didn't have something to eat, they were going to find you something to eat. If you didn't have your books, somebody would find out how to get your books for you. There, it was, it was like a lot of the hustle that was going on in the community at the time there.
Right. All right. Well, Dr. Elston and Mr. Brett Waterfield, thank you both so very, very much for giving us some more information about the game changer, Dr. Joe White, and all the things he did for all of us that are here. There's some folks there, Lawrence and Cecily, I believe, and some other people who are all EOP students. And it's because of EOP that we are where we are today. And I know I'm very thankful for that opportunity. because I was a first-gen college student. My parents wanted me to go to college, but they didn't know what to tell me to do when I got there.
Mhm.
And thank God for EOP that I knew what to do, and there was a path for me to follow. I used to tell people going to college is like somebody saying, yeah, you can play Monopoly, but they don't tell you the rules. Can't win. EOP tells you the rules so you can succeed.
Right.
And buy Park Place and everything else along the way.
Mhm.
You know, you gather as you go, right? So I really want to thank you two for expanding our knowledge of Dr. White, expanding our knowledge of what it was like during those times, giving us something to think about, maybe causing some of us to think about maybe there's some things we could be doing to help our students. And with Dr. White, it started was grassroots, boots on the ground, as we used to call it. So maybe those are things that we need to get back to. And I hope that through this conversation this evening, that maybe that will jar some folks. Maybe say, well, you know, maybe we could get together and do some things. Okay, so thank you both again, both very different perspectives, but both meaningful, and given us some information about Dr. White, because maybe people didn't know a lot about him, but we do now. So before I go, I would like to say, first of all, thank you to everyone that joins us. Again, sorry about the video. You know, technology is technology. We ask that you give us a little grace. And with some information that's going to be going out about tonight and the other webinars that are coming up, we will definitely make sure that those videos are attached to those emails and working. Okay. And there's some things that people said in the chat we just couldn't get to, but obviously this has struck a chord with people, and we remember, and maybe it'll get us to get back to some of the ideas that Dr. White had. So I'd like for you all to please remember there are 3 other webinars coming up. Remembrance of Things Past is our next webinar, and we will take a look back at the years between 1954 and 1965 and a national landscape related to educational equity, politics, and race. So we hope that you will all join us on June 2nd. Again, thank you all so very, very much. You'll be getting more information from us. There's lots of stuff in the chat. I wish I could get to it. There's exhibits coming up at the African American Culture Center. It's the CSULB EOP exhibit. You'll get information about that. And again, thank you all so very, very much. And here's some information up on your screen. But again, you will be getting that information. I want to thank you all so very, very much. And everybody have a blessed evening. And let's remember the game changer, Dr. Joe L. White. Thank you all and good night.